The Hot Zone by Richard Preston. Picture yourself squeezed into a tiny commuter plane, one of those rattling tin cans that bounces through clouds on short flights. You're practically breathing the same recycled air as everyone around you. The guy in the seat next to you has been sick since takeoff, hunched over an air sickness bag like it's the only thing keeping him together. He coughs, and the bag inflates ominously. You try to mind your own business, maybe pretend to be fascinated by the emergency instruction card. But something makes you glance over. His face stops you cold. It's gone completely slack, bruised and mottled, like someone drained all the humanity right out of it. And his eyes! Those eyes are glowing ruby red, fixed and staring like a doll's. His lips are smeared with something that looks like he's been eating wet coffee grounds. The bag is practically overflowing now with this dark, speckled liquid that's part tar black, part bright arterial red. It's what people who study these things call the black vomit. And suddenly the cabin smells like the inside of a butcher shop. The man sitting next to you has become a biological time bomb. And right there, at 30,000 feet, he's just detonated. Now, you might be thinking this sounds like something out of a cheap horror flick, but here's the thing that'll make your skin crawl. Every word of it is true. This is straight from Richard Preston's absolutely riveting book, The Hot Zone, which didn't just top the bestseller charts. It fundamentally changed how we think about our place in the natural world. Preston pulled back the curtain on something terrifying. Deep in those rainforests we're so busy bulldozing, ancient killers have been waiting. Viruses, perfect little killing machines, that have been around for millions of years longer than humans even existed. So what happens when one of these ancient terrors decides to catch a flight? What happens when something with a 90% kill rate starts mixing with the tourist crowd at an international airport? Richard Preston, who's both an incredible journalist and one hell of a storyteller, takes us on that nightmare journey. He puts us right inside the pressurized suits of army scientists battling invisible enemies and into hospital rooms where people literally dissolve from the inside out. By the time we're done today, you're going to think twice about that scratchy throat, that cross-country flight, or even that hike through the woods. You'll understand just how delicate the membrane is between humanity and apocalypse, and how easily it could tear. Our story kicks off not in some high-tech lab, but with one quiet guy, Charles Monet, a French expat living his best solitary life in western Kenya, right in the shadow of Mount Elgon, this massive extinct volcano. Charles was the kind of nature-loving loner who honestly seemed to prefer the company of birds to people. On New Year's Day 1980, feeling adventurous, he and a buddy decided to explore the mountain. They drove up through coffee plantations and into this cool, misty rainforest that probably hadn't changed much in 1,000 years. Eventually, they stumbled onto Kidum Cave. Now, this wasn't your average roadside attraction. We're talking about a cave so enormous it could comfortably house 70 elephants, which actually did show up at night to mine the walls for salt with their tusks. Charles and his friend ventured deep inside, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. Hundreds of bats hung from the ceiling, their eyes catching the light like little red reflectors. The walls were slick with this greenish slime of bat droppings, and these weird sharp crystals stuck out everywhere, honestly looked like nature's own collection of hypodermic needles. Charles, being the curious type, spent hours poking around, probably running his hands over the formations, maybe even pricking his finger on one of those crystals. He had no idea he'd just made contact with something that had been waiting there for eons. 7 days later, the headache hit. And I'm not talking about your standard tension headache you fix with Tylenol. This was a deep, throbbing pain behind his eyeballs that just wouldn't quit. Then came the backache, the nausea, the violent vomiting. Inside his body, something was making millions and millions of copies of itself, what the military folks clinically call extreme amplification. Within days, his face went completely blank. His eyes turned this bright, unnatural red, and tiny star-shaped speckles appeared on his skin. His personality just vanished. His memories erased. He became like a zombie, operating on whatever neurological fumes were left as his brain shut down. Charles Monet wasn't Charles Monet anymore. He was a factory, churning out virus particles. His co-workers freaked out when they saw him and rushed him to the local hospital. The doctors took one look and basically said, "This is way above our pay grade." They decided he needed to get to Nairobi Hospital, the best private facility in East Africa. So they did what seemed reasonable at the time. They stuffed him in a taxi to the airport and put him on a Kenya Airways flight. And right there, our story goes from bad to absolutely terrifying. A hot virus from deep in the African rainforest had just entered the global air travel network. These days, every city on Earth is connected. Just a day's flight from every other city. Once a virus gets into that network, it could be sipping champagne in Paris, eating sushi in Tokyo, or grabbing a hot dog in New York within 24 hours. On that flight, Monet got airsick. He vomited into the little bag they give you, except what came up wasn't your typical airplane food regurgitation. It was the black vomit, this horrific mixture of blood and tarry black material that used to be his internal organs. His insides were literally liquefying. His blood couldn't clot anymore, and it started streaming out of his nose in bright arterial spurts. His face, already speckled with red, was transforming into one massive black and blue bruise. The connective tissue was dissolving, and his face was starting to slide off his skull like a bad Halloween mask. Somehow, when that plane landed in Nairobi, Monet could still walk. He's basically a human-shaped bag of virus soup at this point. And he takes a taxi to the hospital. He sits down in the waiting room, just a small room with a drain in the floor, which is about to become very relevant, and there he crashes and bleeds out. We're talking an insane volume of blood vomited onto the floor, his bowels opening up and adding to the nightmare, and then he just collapses. The virus had completely destroyed its host and was now trying desperately to find a new one. A young doctor named Shem Musoke came running. He had no clue what he was dealing with, just that a man was bleeding to death and had stopped breathing. Without even thinking to put on gloves, Dr. Musoke leaned right over Monet's face, trying to clear his airway. He stuck his fingers into Monet's mouth, scooping out blood and mucus. As he tried to insert a breathing tube, Monet's body spasmed one final time. A fountain of black vomit exploded from his mouth, absolutely drenching Dr. Musoke. It splashed into his eyes, hit his mouth, coated his hands and arms in this red, stringy slime. Monet died that night. When they did the autopsy, the doctors found his liver had turned to liquid mush and his kidneys were destroyed. He'd basically become a corpse while he was still technically alive. 9 days later, Dr. Musoke's back started hurting. Then his eyes went red. His face went blank and expressionless, just like Monet's had. They rushed him into surgery, thinking maybe it was a liver issue. When they opened him up, they were absolutely horrified. His blood wouldn't clot at all, like someone had flipped off his body's coagulation switch. He leaked blood like a sieve, and the surgeons found themselves literally elbow deep in blood. Dr. Musoke looked like he was circling the drain. His physician, Dr. David Silverstein, frantically sent a blood sample to a lab in South Africa. The phone call came in the middle of the night. "He's positive for Marburg virus. the researcher said, probably sounding way too calm for what he was announcing. "This is really serious. We don't know much about Marburg." Marburg. It's an African virus with a German name because it first showed up in Marburg, Germany, back in 1967, hiding in a shipment of green monkeys from Uganda that ended up in a vaccine factory. 7 people died in that outbreak, drowning in their own blood. Marburg is what they call a filovirus, Latin for thread virus, because under a microscope it looks like tangled rope or a snake. It's one of the most lethal things on the planet, and Dr. Musoke was now wrestling with it inside his own body. The hospital went into lockdown mode, and 67 people got quarantined. But then something incredible happened. Against absolutely insane odds, Dr. Musoke started to get better. He survived. He became one of maybe a handful of people on Earth who had looked a filovirus in the face and lived to tell about it. The specific strain of Marburg that came out of Charles Monet's black vomit and passed through Dr. Musoke's body is now called the Musoke strain. And some of it ended up in glass vials, sitting in freezers at a United States Army facility. This is where our story makes a hard turn, shifting from the blazing plains of Africa to the quiet suburban hills of Maryland, just outside Washington, D.C. Enter Major Nancy Jacks, a veterinarian, mom of 2, and Army officer. She's this former Kansas homecoming queen with an athletic build who happened to be a bit of a martial arts badass. The woman could break 4 boards with a spinning back kick, which is honestly terrifying. One evening, while making dinner, she's trying to open a can of green beans with a butcher knife, because apparently she couldn't find the can opener. Her hand slips, and the blade cuts deep into her palm. Just your everyday kitchen accident, right? Except for Nancy, this cut is about to become the stuff of nightmares. Nancy works at USAMRIID. Try saying that 5 times fast. The United States Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases. It's this massive, deliberately windowless concrete fortress at Fort Detrick. The mission is medical defense, protecting soldiers from biological weapons and naturally occurring nightmare diseases. It's basically ground zero for the world's deadliest germs. To work there, you climb through biosafety levels like you're leveling up in a very dangerous video game. 0, then 2, then 3, and finally level 4, the top of the food chain, reserved for lethal airborne agents that have no vaccine and no cure. Nancy's body had a bad reaction to the required vaccinations for level 3 work, so that career path got blocked. The only way she could keep working with dangerous viruses was to skip ahead to the final boss level, get assigned to work in a spacesuit in level 4. She volunteered for an Ebola project, run by this civilian scientist named Eugene Johnson, this legendary virus hunter who'd spent years tracking these things down in Africa. Her superiors weren't thrilled. Some thought her hands were too quick, not steady enough for the delicate, no mistakes allowed work inside a suit. Her own husband, Jerry, also an Army vet, absolutely hated the idea. He couldn't stand the thought of his wife, the mother of his kids, handling something lethal and incurable in her hands. But Nancy wasn't backing down. She got the assignment. Soon after, she got scheduled for her first major task, dissecting monkeys that had been deliberately infected with the deadliest of the filovirus family, Ebola Zaire. This particular strain, called the Muyinga strain, came from the blood of a nurse in Zaire who died in 1976 after taking care of a nun who'd bled to death from the virus. Ebola Zaire is what they grimly call a slate wiper. It kills 9 out of every 10 people it infects. Nancy suited up. The Chemterian biological spacesuit is this heavy-duty pressurized outfit that completely seals you off from the world. The second that helmet goes on, everything becomes this roaring sound of air, and whatever you can see through a small plastic faceplate. Inside the Level 4 lab, she and her partner, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Johnson, approached the monkey carcasses. They were going to perform a necropsy, basically an autopsy, to figure out what killed them. As Nancy reached her gloved hands into the monkey's body cavity, she could feel the slippery wetness of Ebola-infected blood, even through 3 layers of rubber, and then her nightmare became real. A rip appeared right across the palm of her outer glove. She tore it off, only to discover the next glove. The main suit glove was also compromised. There was a crack at the wrist. Her hand felt wet and clammy inside. Ebola-infected blood had gotten through her spacesuit and was now smeared all over her innermost latex glove, that thin last line of defense against her actual skin. And right underneath that blood, she could see the Band-Aid covering the cut from the butcher knife. Total panic mode threatened to kick in. She bolted for the airlock, this small chamber where you go through a 7-minute chemical shower to decontaminate your suit. Standing there in the dark, getting sprayed with chemicals, she genuinely thought her life was over. She thought about the slammer, the Institute's Level 4 hospital for people who get exposed. She thought about her kids at home with the babysitter, and how she'd forgotten to go to the bank so there was no money in the house. When she finally stumbled out of the suit, she tested her innermost glove by filling it with water, absolutely dreading seeing a tiny stream squirt out. The unmistakable sign of a leak, the sign that Ebola had touched her skin. The glove held. No leaks. She basically collapsed against the wall in relief. But here's where it gets even more terrifying. A few weeks later, 2 completely healthy, uninfected monkeys that were housed in cages on the opposite side of the room from the Ebola-infected ones suddenly got sick and died. Nobody had touched them. Nobody had injected them. The virus had somehow drifted across open air. As Nancy would later put it with chilling simplicity, "That was when I knew that Ebola can travel through the air." Fast forward to fall 1989, to Reston, Virginia, this nice, quiet suburb just 10 miles from Washington, D.C. In a completely ordinary office park, right across from a McDonald's, was this building used by Hazelton Research Products. It was basically a monkey house, a quarantine facility for wild monkeys imported for lab research. On October 4th, a shipment of 100 wild monkeys arrived from the Philippines. Crab-eating monkeys, a common and cheap species caught in the rainforests. The consulting vet for the facility was this calm, steady guy named Dan Dalgard. A few weeks after the monkeys arrived, the colony manager called him up. The monkeys were dying at a really weird rate. Nearly a third of the shipment was already dead. Dalgard went to check things out. He found sick animals with droopy, glazed eyes and fevers. When he dissected them, he was puzzled. Their spleens were bizarrely enlarged and hard, like a stick of salami, and they had blood in their intestines. Dalgard figured it was probably simian hemorrhagic fever, SHF, this nasty virus that's deadly to monkeys but harmless to humans. To confirm it, he sent some samples up to USAMRIID, literally bits of spleen wrapped in aluminum foil like leftover hot dogs. The samples landed on the desk of a civilian virologist named Peter Yarling. He and an intern named Tom Geisbert started culturing the virus, trying to grow it in flasks of living monkey cells. A few days later, the flasks looked sick. The cells were swollen and full of tiny black specks, like someone had shaken pepper over scrambled eggs. The liquid in the flask had gone milky and cloudy with dead, exploded cells. Yarling thought the culture was contaminated with some common bacteria. He unscrewed the cap to check for smell, Bacteria usually stink. Viruses don't. He took a sniff. Nothing. He handed the flask to Tom Gijsbert. "Here," he said casually. "It smells like Welch's grape juice." Gijsbert sniffed it too. No smell. They had just inhaled air from a flask containing an unknown, amplified virus. Gijsbert decided to look at the cells under his powerful electron microscope. He went to work, slicing a pinhead-sized button of the dead cells with a diamond knife, literally the sharpest blade on Earth, sharp enough to slice a virus in half. He sat down at the console, his face glowing green in the light of the viewing screen. He zoomed in on a single cell, his breath caught. The cell was absolutely destroyed. And it was crawling with worms. The cell was packed wall to wall with long, stringy particles, a filovirus. Gijsbert immediately thought, Marburg. This awful feeling washed over him as he realized what he and Peter Yarling had done 10 days earlier. 10 days. Right smack in the middle of the incubation period for Marburg. He frantically developed photographs of what he was seeing. In the dark room, as the images emerged, he saw white cobras tangled up with each other, Medusa's hair. It was breathtakingly beautiful in the most obscene way possible, nature's dark goddess revealed. He rushed the photos to Peter Yarling. Yarling, remembering the sniffing incident, thought it had to be a joke. It wasn't a joke. The virus was real. This was a level 4 agent, and they'd been handling it in a level 3 lab without spacesuits. They were now potentially on death watch. They took the photos up the chain of command to Colonel C.J. Peters, the chief of the Disease Assessment Division. He was this casual, brilliant, deeply experienced virus hunter. Looking at the photos, he felt what he called a major pucker factor setting in. The evidence was alarming, but they needed absolute confirmation. That confirmation came from Peter Yarling himself. Dressed in a full spacesuit, he went into a pitch-black closet in his Level 4 lab to perform the definitive test. He used blood serum from past filovirus victims, blood from a Marburg survivor, blood from an Ebola Sudan victim, and blood from Nurse Mayinga, the Ebola Zaire victim. If one of those blood samples reacted, if it glowed under the microscope, he'd know exactly what they were dealing with. The Marburg sample didn't glow. The Ebola Sudan sample glowed weakly. But the Mayinga sample, to his absolute horror, it lit up brightly. He jerked his head back. He ran the test again, convinced he must have screwed something up. Same result. The dead woman's blood recognized this virus. The monkeys in Reston, Virginia didn't have Marburg. They had Ebola. The discovery sent absolute shockwaves through the highest levels of the U.S. Army. An emergency meeting got called with Major General Philip Russell, the commander of the Army's Medical Research Command. Nancy Jacks was there, along with C.J. Peters and Peter Yarling. When General Russell saw the photos, he swore out loud. He knew immediately what they were looking at. "We have a natural emergency on our hands," he declared. "This is an infectious threat of major consequences." The million-dollar question was, could it travel through the air? Nancy Jacks told the story of her control monkeys dying back in 1983. The evidence was terrifying but not complete. They were facing a crisis with 2 options. Option 1, seal off the monkey house and let the virus burn itself out naturally. Option 2, go in and sterilize the whole place, kill all the monkeys, and drench the building in chemicals. They called it a nuke. The decision was made to act. The Army would move in, but this was incredibly delicate territory. This wasn't some military threat overseas. This was a public health crisis on American civilian soil. Legally, this was the domain of the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, down in Atlanta. General Russell knew there'd be a turf war. "The Army has the muscle but not the authority," he said. "The CDC has the authority but not the muscle. And there's going to be a pissing contest." He decided to move forward anyway. "A policy of moving out and doing it, and asking forgiveness afterward," he declared, "is much better than a policy of asking permission and having it denied." The mission was on. It was a full-scale, military biohazard operation, what they call a smashdown. C.J. Peters got put in charge, and he chose Colonel Jerry Jacks, Nancy's husband, who'd never even worn a spacesuit before, to lead the team on the ground. Then things got worse. One of the monkey caretakers, a guy named Milton Frantig, got violently ill. He stumbled out of the monkey house and vomited on the lawn. A man was down. He hadn't been bitten, he hadn't been cut. If he had Ebola, he most likely got it through the air. The company immediately handed the building and all its animals over to the Army. Jerry Jacks assembled his team of 91 tangos, the Army's animal care technicians. A lot of them were just kids, 18-year-old privates. Gene Johnson, the seasoned Ebola hunter, briefed them with a grim face. "This is the real thing," he told them. "A biological level 4 outbreak is not a training session." At dawn, the mission kicked off. A caravan of unmarked vehicles, including a biocontainment ambulance with a bubble stretcher, pulled up behind the monkey house, carefully out of sight of the daycare center just down the hill. Jerry Jacks and his buddy, Captain Mark Haynes, went in first. They put on their orange Rakel spacesuits and entered a dark, makeshift airlock. When they crossed to the hot side, they got hit with a wall of heat, this absolutely horrific smell, and the screaming of hundreds of terrified monkeys. The building was completely trashed. The walls were covered with monkey feces scribbles, like some cryptic message from the primate's soul. The operation was total chaos. The plan was to euthanize the animals, take tissue samples, and decontaminate everything. But things immediately started going sideways. A monkey escaped its cage and started leaping around the room, bleeding and frantic, way too fast to catch. One soldier's air supply failed, and her suit went limp. Another soldier, Specialist Rhonda Williams, was drawing blood from what she thought was an unconscious monkey when it suddenly woke up, grabbed her hand, and tried to pull it toward its mouth to bite her. For days, the teams worked in stifling heat, sweating until they'd lost pounds of body weight, surrounded by death and the constant threat of an invisible killer. They put down 450 monkeys, one by one. When the last animal was gone, a decon team moved in. They sealed the building airtight and used sunbeam electric frying pans, honestly, just regular kitchen appliances, to cook disinfecting crystals, filling the entire building with formaldehyde gas for 3 solid days. The monkey house got nuked. It was rendered completely lifeless. But the story has one final, absolutely chilling twist. Milton Frantig, the guy who vomited, he didn't have Ebola. It was just the flu. In fact, none of the human workers who got exposed actually got sick. However, when they tested their blood, they made a shocking discovery. All 4 of the animal caretakers who'd worked in that building tested positive for Ebola. The virus had entered their bodies, multiplied, cycled through them, but it hadn't hurt them at all. They named the strain Ebola Reston. It was an airborne filovirus that could absolutely devastate monkeys, but was, for some unknown reason, harmless to humans. Some tiny, subtle difference in its genetic code had spared Washington, D.C. from a potential apocalypse. It was, as one scientist put it, a bullet that hit us, but it was a rubber bullet from a .22, not a dum-dum from a .45. The question that hangs in the air long after you finish this book is pretty simple. What happens next time when the bullet isn't rubber? When you close a book like The Hot Zone, it's genuinely hard to just put it back on the shelf and move on with your day. It fundamentally changes how you see the world around you. Suddenly, you become hyper-aware of this vast, invisible universe of microscopic life that exists all around us and inside us. The book reads like a thriller, absolutely, but it's also this profound meditation on nature and where we actually fit in the grand scheme of things. The most powerful lesson, I think, is one of straight-up humility. We tend to see ourselves as the masters of this planet, right? We build skyscrapers, we fly across oceans in a few hours, we split atoms. But Richard Preston reminds us that we're just one species among countless others, living in a biosphere that's been operating by its own ancient rules for billions of years. The filoviruses, Marburg, Ebola, they aren't evil. They're not sitting around plotting humanity's demise. They're simply life. They're what Preston calls molecular sharks, a motive without a mind, following one simple directive: replicate. In their world, we aren't some dominant species. We're just meat, a new, abundant food source that suddenly appeared all over the planet. This leads to the book's most unsettling idea, that these virus emergences are a natural consequence of our own actions. Preston writes that the Earth is mounting an immune response against the human species. As we bulldoze rainforests and tear apart ancient ecosystems, we're shaking loose viruses that have been hidden away for millennia. AIDS, he suggests, is the revenge of the rainforest. It's a virus that likely jumped to humans from primates in Africa, probably through hunters handling bloody meat. It appeared silently, and by the time we noticed it, it was way too late. The Ebola Reston outbreak was different. It was a warning shot across the bow. We saw it, we confronted it, and we got incredibly, almost impossibly lucky. So what can we actually take away from this? How do we apply the lessons of this terrifying true story to our own lives? First, develop a real, profound respect for the complexity of nature. It's not a theme park or a pretty backdrop for your vacation photos. It's a powerful, self-regulating system that's been fine-tuning itself for eons. When we act with arrogance, believing we can control it without consequences, we're basically begging for disaster. The story of the Hot Zone is a reminder that we're part of that system, not hovering above it. Second, appreciate the courage and dedication of the people on the front lines of these crises. People like Nancy Jacks, who walked into a level 4 hot zone fully aware of the risks, because it was her job, her duty. Or Dr. Shem Musoke, who didn't hesitate to help a dying stranger, even though it nearly cost him everything. Their stories are powerful reminders that, when we're faced with the unknown, our greatest tools aren't just technology and science. They're discipline, courage, and a commitment to helping each other out. And finally, don't be afraid to face uncomfortable truths head-on. The people in this book, from the scientists to the soldiers, had to look directly at one of nature's most terrifying creations. They had to understand it to have any chance of fighting it. In our own lives, we often turn away from hard truths because they're scary or inconvenient. This book teaches us that knowledge, even frightening knowledge, is power. It's always better to face the monster and know its name than to pretend it doesn't exist and hope for the best. That was the book summary of The Hot Zone by Richard Preston. We've touched on the incredible true stories that fill its pages, but here's the honest truth. A summary can only take you so far. The real power of this book is in Preston's masterful minute-by-minute storytelling that puts you right there inside the spacesuit, right beside the hospital bed, right in the middle of the chaos. This summary is designed to give you a sense of whether this book deserves your time. If anything we've talked about today has sparked your curiosity or sent even a slight chill down your spine, I genuinely urge you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just learning, it's an experience that will fundamentally shift how you see the world and our incredibly fragile place in it. There's a link to the book in the description. Also, if you found this summary valuable and want to explore more incredible books that have shaped the minds of leaders and thinkers, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let's keep journeying together through the world's most powerful ideas. Let's keep growing together.